Okay, everyone, welcome back. If you've been here before, if you haven't been here before, welcome for the first time. This is the latest in the series of lectures on core skills for your exam, whichever exam that might be, focusing on pronunciation issues. Now, this week's issue is quite an interesting one, but it's one we're going to start this week and continue next week. So this week I can tell you that next week will be addressing similar issues, so don't worry if you didn't fully understand the whole idea of assimilation. That is this week's topic, assimilation, because we will carry on talking about this over the next week, possibly the next 2 weeks. We'll see how we go next week. Assimilation, as will become clear to you, is absolutely central to your ability to dominate the speaking in the test that you're doing, whether it's the speaking in the IELTS or the OET, or speaking, or especially in the PTE, the reading aloud. In the test that you take, the way that you speak is absolutely central to getting a good mark, or unfortunately suffering with a very poor one. So assimilation is the topic of the week, but first of all, let's talk about last week's homework. Now, you remember that last week we spoke about the is, s, and z sound that comes at the end of words, and I asked you to come up with 5 words that you can conjugate and come up with those sounds at the end. And then the other one was the th and th sound, so voiced and unvoiced, or rather unvoiced and voiced, where you have the th or th in the middle, at the beginning or at the end of the word. I hope you came up with your words. These are just some that I'm putting up for well, to refresh your memories and to show you that I actually did a little bit of homework as well. The word is leases. Okay, to lease a property, to rent it out, leases. He leases it. Creases, that line in your trousers when you iron them. Judges, he judges people all the time. Wedges, as in putting something to stop the door slamming, or potato wedges, which are delicious. And raises, to raise and to lower. It raises the average age. Then the s sound, the unvoiced s sound, spikes, pokes, I think pokes and prods, trips, wants, and lights. Okay, so these are the words I came up with, the s sound on the end. And then finally the voiced z sound, peels, peel the potatoes, plans, tries, buys, and finally, I think that's it actually, grabs. There you go. I thought grabs had gone away. Grab is to snatch. So if you see little children, when they see the table full of sweets and chocolates, they grab the sweets and chocolates. He grabs the chocolate. All right? Grab. 15 words now with the th and th sound. Let me see. I don't know what you came up with. I came up with mouth, thing, birth, thought, month, thistle. Thistle, by the way, is the national flower of Scotland. So if you've ever watched the rugby and they sing that song, Flower of Scotland, the flower of Scotland is thistle. And plinth, for a statue, forgive me. And then breath, breath, 1 breath, 2 breaths. And then the voiced the sound, this smooth brother, those, breathe, not breath, breathe, and northern. I could have said southern as well. Okay, so that was the homework that I came up with. I don't know how that tallies with the work that you have done. Hopefully it was very similar to what I did. As always, any questions that you've got for things I'm talking about in this webinar, please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and at the end we'll have some time to talk about them. All right, so let's get back to this week's topic. What does assimilation mean? You may have heard the word before. We use it in a wider context, and we'll start by talking about the wider context, and then we'll narrow it down to the language content. What does it mean in a language learning sense, in the language production sense, assimilation? So there's the word assimilation. Assimilation. Notice in brackets you've got the schwa, that unvoiced common sound at in the penultimate phoneme, and the first phoneme is also a schwa. It's not assimilation or assimilation, it's assimilation. Quote, the process of taking in and fully understanding information or ideas. We often talk about cultural assimilation. So it's very interesting. You know that I lived in Brazil for a long time. Brazil has an enormous Lebanese community, an enormous Japanese community, an enormous Italian community. They all came in over the last 150 years, and they've all assimilated into Brazilian society. So they are all ethnically of one thing, but they're also undoubtedly, undeniably Brazilian. They have assimilated into the local culture, and also their culture assimilates into the wider culture too. So in a broad sense, that's the idea, the process of taking in and fully understanding information or ideas. Now, if you're a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation, there's always a possibility, I do not know. I'm not a big fan, but I live with a guy, Jason, who is a huge fan of Star Trek The Next Generation. And that is Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played by Patrick Stewart, who is an excellent actor. And there was a whole storyline of the Borg. The Borg go around the galaxy in this massive, huge box thing. And what they say to everybody, every planet they go to, resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. And ultimately, everyone comes out looking like a Borg robot. Okay? It's an interesting storyline. If you haven't seen it, never mind. If you have seen it, well, I hope that this has agreed with you to see somebody referring to The Next Generation. So it's not to do with anything as sinister as making people become cyborgs. Assimilation in language terms and pronunciation terms means something slightly different. It's very much along the lines of what we talked about in the wider context. But let's have a look. The first idea we have is a sound becomes more similar to another sound in its environment. Okay, now the definition on its own is not going to give you all of the information that you need, but assimilation means a sound becomes more similar to another sound in its environment. We'll give you some context on that, don't worry. The other thing I found, the other definition I found was assimilation is a general term in phonetics for the process by which a spoken sound becomes similar or identical to a neighboring sound. All right? So it is very much the idea of how sound is affected by proximity to another sound. All right? That is really, really important. I did tell you in an earlier lecture, English is not a phonetic language. So what you read in terms of the spelling has very little to do with what you pronounce in terms of what you actually see and say. All right, so what you see and what you say are often very different things. Sometimes it works, oftentimes it does not work. All right, so let's have a look then. This is a little task for you. Read this passage aloud as naturally as you possibly can. Okay, I'm not going to say anything at this point. Read this aloud to yourselves naturally. Okay. Okay. I say passage, in fact, it's one sentence. All right. So what you may have noticed is that it is one sentence. You've got the punctuation 1, 2, 3 commas there. It's not a trick. Okay. I'm not trying to make your life difficult at all. I've just wanted you to listen to yourself producing the language and comparing it with what I'm going to talk about right now. Look at those words that I've highlighted here in red. Okay. So in the first line, the word the. In the second line, the word that and is. What do you notice about those elements in red? If you read them aloud in the context of the sentence, then what you ought to notice is that when you're speaking naturally, you might read them with certain contractions. You might diminish the sound depending on the words that come either side of that word. So that can be done in a formal contraction way. So you have becomes you've, everyone is becomes everyone's. So that's a normal contraction. Now, on the whole, we advise people not to use contractions in their writing when you're writing in a test. So don't go for contraction. So there, THEYR''RE. Avoid that and write they are. So avoid the contractions when you're writing. Now, this is to do with the way that we speak, and it's to do with a natural way of speaking, and so contraction does come into it. So I don't say on the whole, I agree with people who say that everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I do it more naturally, and what happens is this: on the whole, listen to the word the when I say on the whole. It's almost simply one little sound. Okay, on the whole, I agree with people who say that everyone's, that everyone, that, I don't say that, I say that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but when an issue, listen to the but and an when I say, but when an issue like this comes up, you've got to take a stand. And again, the you've got to take a stand. So we diminish some sounds naturally, and we augment other sounds, or we do pronounce sounds that we can actually handle in terms of the movement of our mouth, the movement of our lips and our tongue. All right, we'll come to talk a little bit more about where sounds come from at the end of this session, but that's what you need to think about to sound natural. We don't say one word at a time. It comes across very badly. It sounds like you don't really have a proper command of the language. Think about somebody speaking in your language and they sound a little bit, I was going to say like Siri, but even Siri on an Apple phone sounds a bit more natural than something that talks like a robot from the 1950s. All right? So, knowing which sounds to assimilate, and that's what we're talking about, what we're doing to the sounds, which sound to assimilate is essential if you want to make your speech sound more natural, okay? The natural sound of your speech is really, really important to raising your overall level. That is as true for somebody taking a traditional test like the IELTS or the OET, where you actually sit in front of an examiner, or for a computer-based test like the TOEFL or the PTE, where you're speaking to the machine, you're recording to an algorithm, or you're speaking to into a microphone, and the recording might be heard later by another human being, but it's to do with the natural sound of your speech, okay? The more natural your speech sounds, the more you have successfully assimilated sounds. So let's look at some examples of assimilation. On the left, we have a hand, and on the right, we have a bag. Two simple one-syllable words in English, a hand and a bag. So the phonetic symbols are hand, h, a, n, d, and bag, b, a, g, okay? Hand, bag. But when we make it into one word, a compound word, it's not handbag, is it? It's handbag or handbag. That, and sorry for anyone from North America or who learn North American English, you might say purse. A purse in Australia, in Britain, is a wallet for a woman, okay? But that, let's, for the argument's sake, and because I'm teaching, this is a handbag or a handbag. But you wouldn't say that that is a handbag, because that is an example of assimilation. Think about what happens to the d before the b. The d in hand and the b in bag. It is the b that has the power over the d. The d disappears and the b dominates. The b survives. So legitimately, in this assimilation, the handbag becomes handbag or handbag. Now, which one dominates precisely is something that we'll talk about a little bit also at the end. But notice both of these are legitimate. I discussed with the people in my office, because I was curious, how would you say this word? And of course, when people are self-conscious about it, they say, oh no, I say de, I say handbag. No, you don't. No one says handbag. It's ridiculous. People say handbag or handbag, the n or the m, but they don't say handbag, okay? So that is assimilation. That's what I'm talking about. I hope that makes it a bit clear for you. Look at this word. Look at this picture. It's not a word yet. You're going to tell me what that is a picture of, okay? It's a Scooby-Doo sandwich. Now, of course, I'm exaggerating for effect, but what you've got are two syllables in the word, sand and which. Of course, it's not W-I-T-C-H, it's W-I-C-H. But nobody says, I would like a bacon sandwich, because nobody talks like that. They would say, either it's a sandwich, a sandwich, or a sandwich. Now notice, you have a n, you have a m, or nothing at all. So no consonant sound in the middle of the word when you link those two sections of the words together. Sandwich, sandwich, or sandwich, okay? So there's not even a n or a m in the third, in the yellow option there. All of those are legitimate examples of assimilation, and that is what we do in English. We do it because it works. We do it because it is just impossible to get your mouth around every sound in the language, so we need to do it in a way which is approximately doable by a normal, natural-speaking native of English. Okay? So if you say it is a sandwich, that's weird. Now, it's literally, I suppose, correct, but otherwise it just comes across in a very weird way. Now, some of you, I hope most of you or all of you, would have seen what I'm referring to in this next example, and that is Jamal, my colleague, did a lecture on prefixes. Now, there are all sorts of different prefixes, but it is the in prefix I want to talk about. In comes from Latin meaning not. So, 4 examples for you here are inappropriate, incomplete, intransigent, and insatiable. Now, the prefix in, if I remove that, I still have appropriate, complete, transigent, and satiable. Now, I have not changed those words at all. There's been no assimilation with in. In before those words just makes a new word, inappropriate, incomplete, intransigent, and insatiable. Now, compare that to the im, il, or ir words. We've already got in, so you could ask legitimately, why do we need all of the other ones? It's so difficult to remember. What's the rule for im? What's the rule for ir? What's the rule for il? It is complicated, but not as complicated as saying impossible, improbable, illegal, illegitimate, irregular, irreplaceable, and irresistible. Okay? Think about the mouth gymnastics involved in using the in prefix with the words possible, probable, legal, legitimate, and so on. It doesn't make sense. So what the language has done is it has evolved, and this is all absolutely part of the language. It's evolved so that we have a more pronounceable sound preceding different first sounds in words. So if the word starts with an R, regular, replaceable, and resistible, it's an IR word, irreplaceable, irresistible, okay? Im comes before the P words, P words, impossible, improbable, and then il, illegal, illegitimate, and so on, because it's just easier to say. So that's why, and that's a very good example of what it is that we do in order to make what we're saying make sense to our mouths. We've got to say the words. We don't just read the words. English is a spoken language and English is a written language. So we've got to accommodate that, and we've got to make our mouths fit what we're saying. So we have in, im, il, or ir, okay, irregular, and so on. So again, that's an example of what we do to make sure that we avoid the inconvenience of having those weird combinations of two sounds. So we've got sand and which becomes sandwich. So instead of having irregular, it's now modified inside the language, it's been assimilated, and it becomes irregular. Okay, so that answers some of the questions that some of you may have about, well, why do we use certain prefixes and not others? Basically, it's down to how the language comes out of your mouth. Now, here's another task. I want you to look at this list of words, and I'd like you to read them aloud to yourself. Okay, ready? Okay, it's not a long list, but I hope you had a chance to read the list. So what I'm going to do, so you can hear somebody different from me talking, I'm going to have my colleague read them to you. Listen to how she reads this list, okay? Now, I don't know if you can hear that. I can't hear that. So let me try one more time.
White paper, 10 bikes, hot dog, keep practicing, pet turtle, red tie.
Okay, so there's Jamal reading all of these words out literally as they are. Remember what I said about sand and witch? White paper, 10 bikes, hot dog, keep practicing, pet turtle, red tie. All right? I hope that that's exactly what you said or something approximating that. Now, listen a second time, because now the same speaker, Jamal's going to read the same list of the same words, but notice any difference in the way that she's saying this the second time, okay? Pay attention. Oh, come on. Oh, let's see, go.
White paper, 10 bikes, hot dog, keep practicing, pet turtle, red tie.
Okay, so I'll read them again as well. So you've got them. White paper, 10 bikes, hot dog, keep practicing, pet turtle, red tie. Okay, now what do you notice about the difference when you say these words when they sit together either as an expression? So for example, a government white paper is something which is presented before a bill. Okay, so you prepare a white paper and then you decide to make it into a bill or not. It's a white paper. Outside on the rack, there are 10 bikes. For lunch, I fancy having a hot dog. To improve my guitar skills, I'm going to keep practicing. I wish I didn't have a pet turtle because it eats everything, and Donald Trump wears a ridiculously long red tie. Red tie, all right? So their words that belong together. Notice what happens to the final sound of the first word, or the final phoneme there. Let's have a look at that. Let's look in the transcription. White paper, what happens to the t sound? It vanishes. White paper, white paper. I don't make a t sound. 10 bikes might become 10 bikes, and I know it sounds like I'm forcing it, but 10 bikes is what it more effectively is than 10 bikes, 10 bikes, 10 bikes. So it's more of a m than a n. The n, definitely not. The m, possibly. 10 bikes. It's not hot dog, it's hot dog. Hot dog. Hot dog. Keep practicing becomes keep practicing. Keep practicing. There's no double p sound. Keep practicing. It's too annoying to do the two bilabial plosives. I'm not going to do that again, so keep practicing. All right, so the first p sound, gone. Pet turtle becomes pet turtle. Same thing with the p, we have the t. All right, so the first t is sacrificed. It's not there anymore. Pet turtle. Red tie becomes red tie. Red tie. I go straight from the e to the t. Red tie. It sounds, it might seem like I'm saying a d. I'm not saying a d. The d has gone. So red tie. Okay? So here, knowing which sounds to assimilate depends on knowing where the sounds are made. Okay? Now, this is a cross-section of somebody's head. I don't know if you've caught the, there's an exhibition that goes around the world of some guy who slices bodies into little pieces. It's all okay. It's not illegal. But it's quite interesting to see, and you can actually see cross-sections of people. This is a cross-section of somebody's head for you to be able to see where the sounds are coming from in the mouth. Now, there are bits that you can recognize. So you've got the nose, the lips, the teeth, the tongue. Okay? Now, there are other bits that you may not know the word for. Now, blade is just a reference to the sort of the long part of the tongue and not the tip. The bit behind the tip, the blade of the tongue. You can see the throat as well. Now, behind your top teeth, there is a hard protrusion called the alveolar ridge. The alveolar ridge is a really important part of the way that we produce all sorts of sounds. Last week we talked about the. That's not alveolar ridge, that's teeth. Think about where the t sound comes from. That is the alveolar ridge. The t, where's your tongue sitting when you make a t sound? Okay, like time, t, the tongue sits at the alveolar ridge, okay? So the tip of the tongue is in the alveolar ridge. The tongue is sticking out, and I'm using the top teeth and to an extent the bottom teeth to help make that sound, all right? And then you have the lips as well. So, so f uses the bottom lips, b uses both lips together. So knowing where those sounds come from, knowing where we're making those sounds does help in identifying which of the sounds are going to be dropped and assimilated and which of the sounds are going to be given expression. So n is an example, like I just gave you about t. N comes from the alveolar ridge. Think about it. The tip of the tongue sits on the alveolar ridge and you make a n sound. So if you say the word nice, n, nice, the n sound starts with the tongue on the alveolar ridge, n. All right? Then the m sound, m, comes from both lips. I don't need the alveolar ridge. I just need my lips to go m, 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 m. N, alveolar ridge, m, bilabial. Both lips moving together to make the m sound. All right? So is it sandwich or sandwich? That's up to you. All right? Whatever comes out of your mouth naturally is what it should be. Both of them are in fact acceptable sounds. Notice though that the m is from the lips and the n is from the alveolar ridge. So if you say sandwich or sandwich, depends on the proximity of the next phoneme, which is w. W. Now, w comes from the lips, doesn't use the alveolar ridge. Sandwich, sandwich. So more people probably say sandwich because the next sound is also from the lips. So I don't have to do two things. Sandwich, sandwich, even though my mouth is moving in that direction. If I go sandwich, sandwich, it's both m and w are produced by the lips. Okay, so that is something for you to consider. Think about where the sounds come from, and then you might feel more comfortable about knowing which of the words you're going to be assimilating when it comes to speaking more naturally in English. I need to emphasize this, and I will say this as much as I can. It is not about your accent, okay? Everyone has an accent. I have an accent, so do you. That's not your main concern. Your main concern is how you sound natural when you speak English, all right? That's what I'm trying to do this week, and I'll be doing it again next week when we talk about a little bit more information as to how assimilation works and other areas of the way that we produce sounds. Now, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of homework for me. I'm going to leave this on the screen a little bit. Remember, this video does go up onto YouTube, so if you want to do a screenshot of this, go ahead. If you don't, and I don't know what, you don't know how to do a screenshot, that's also fine, because this video will be up on YouTube very soon. And take a shot of the screen and read through this out loud. Read it so that you can actually hear what you're saying. Then what I want you to do is start identifying the sounds that you will be assimilating, or that you could probably be assimilating to sound more natural when you're speaking English. Joe and I went off to the bakery to buy 8 loaves of freshly baked bread. So read it aloud, listen to the way that you're saying it, and then think about where those assimilated sounds might be. It could be something that you might contract. It could be something that you can simply leave out and eliminate entirely because the next sound is going to dominate. Remember what I said about sandwich, handbag? The d in both of those words is gone. Doesn't make it illegitimate, doesn't make it incorrect pronunciation, but it does mean that we are not saying sand and witch, we're saying sandwich. We're not saying hand and bag, we're saying handbag. So that's what I want you to think about when you're working through these this particular exercise, okay? So that is your homework. We will continue this conversation again next week, and I look forward to you joining me. As always, upgrade now if you want to pass your exam. We'll help you to do that. And I will be taking any questions from people now for the next few minutes. Okay? Thanks a lot.